So a family moves to a house that has a pet cemetery in their backyard that can bring back the dead, but sometimes dead is better. And that's basically, of course, the story of Pet Sematary, the same name. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Hi there.
And the thing that I thought about asking this time was, so what makes you a fan of horror? Like, is it the, adrenaline? Like, kind of, I was thinking about kind of college days where, like, my buddy and I would just different times exchange videos, right? Like, we rent one video and kind of give it to each other and stuff. And then invariably, one of the ones that we kind of would always go back to would be horror and stuff.
Yeah, horror is very rewatchable, I think, for many reasons. One, it's not that boring in that someone always gets killed at some point. So that stops it from being boring on a very basic level. It's, it plays with your expectations. There's also sometimes some very interesting conceptual stuff that sort of tries to push the boundaries of what would be an acceptable reality. The sort of cosmic horror genre is pretty interesting. There's lots of social commentary, psychology, all sorts of things in horror. I think it's, we've often said it's the redheaded stepchild of the movie industry, but it's, it's got a lot of fun stuff in it for me.
And I think for, like kind of whether you're college age or teens and stuff, there's the, the kind of the date night factor and stuff where like different times, like there's nothing like kind of hunkering down with, your gal and stuff like that. And it's like kind of different times, goes to something more primal, right? Where you're like kind of the quote unquote protector. You're kind of like, like charging in, viewing wise and stuff, like granted, you're not really going into like a dangerous situation, but your girl's kind of like, tucked in next to you. It's like, I mean, it's such a cliche, but I think it still works no matter, we're now in 2020 or 19, whatever stuff.
I don't think I've ever had a girlfriend who's behaved in that way. So I either have, I've only ever dated women who've done one of two things. One, they've had absolutely zero interest in watching horror movies whatsoever. So just refuse to watch them at all. Or they're more hardcore than me. And then they'll make fun of me for getting scared at the bits that make you jump. So I've never managed to find that middle ground. But
and that's actually why I shared that video like offline and stuff like that of the SNL skit. That it's a funny thing though that like where there's apparently a trend of like women, like kind of really getting into these kind of it's not even like reality shows, like kind of, but it's like or real crime, but it's like where it's kind of like something to do with murder or some kind of thing like that, and it
No, it's very it's funny. What I've noticed is that women, if it's within a realistic context, murder mysteries, women, it seems to draw women in. But if as soon as it starts to get into more supernatural or science fictionary territory or something's a bit sort of out of the bounds of reality, it's less appealing somehow.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to generalize because obviously there's plenty of women who like horror movies too, but yeah, it is interesting. It's I could count the number of on my hands, the number of women that watch, are what we've been reviewing lately versus the murder mystery stuff, which seems to be vastly more popular. But
So oddly enough, this first, the original, Pet Sematary in 1989 was directed by a woman, Mary Lambert, who had done like Madonna videos and also Ramones is apparently another one, which that actually led to the song being used in the end and stuff like that. And the thing that like I have to ask though is like kind of like, okay, the main characters like Dale Midkiff, who plays Lewis, and Denise Crosby, who's of course Tasha Yar from Star Trek Next Gen. Do they not like look for a house that has like a cul-de-sac or something where like that the kids can play in the street safely?
Yeah, I mean, this is a movie that begs the question, could all of this just have been solved by speed bumps, or at least a sign, you got these trucks sort of motoring away about 20 feet away from their back door. And you just thought, did they not look into this before they moved to their remote town?
And like it's funny to me that like Fred Gwynn as the kindly older next door neighbor Judd, he blames himself and like I mean I thought he did a great performance, kind of like showing his remorse and all that kind of stuff. But I blame the parents for not like,
I mean, kind of. Basically, I mean, I think this whole movie is really about bad parenting decisions, in my opinion. I mean, how can you think about buying a house and just with young children, and you're like going, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I suppose there's like a really busy, road on one side, and there's a cemetery full of dead animals on the other.
Yes.
Let's move there. I mean, it makes
with the Indian burial ground on top of that.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I mean, it made very little sense. So yeah, obviously the blame is squarely with the parents on that one. I mean, I thought, Judd, I mean, Fred Gwynn, aka Herman Munster from the Munsters, playing his character, is basically the cliched old man in any horror movie that is in any kind of pastiche. He's there going, yeah, I might want to go back to that cemetery back there full of dead animals. Yeah, he's exactly that character, and it's quite pleasing the way that he just kind of basically sabotages their entire family life through his desire to bring things back from the dead.
And meanwhile, there's this spirit, right? Victor Pascow, who like is trying to warn him. Like, he's this guy who gets run over, and Lewis, because he's a doctor or something like that, tried to, barely tried to revive him or something like that. And meanwhile, like all throughout this movie, unlike the sequel, or excuse me, remake, as we'll talk about later, I mean, how many different times has the guy like literally jumped in front of him, telling him not to go, don't do this.
Yeah, I think this is kind of one of those things about this movie that's kind of fun, and also one of those comments on maybe particularly men's attempts to try and fix problems, or try and resolve situations in a really bad way that they can't actually do. Mainly because it's focused on the father in the original Pet Sematary, and him trying to do this. And it no matter how many times Victor Pascow pops up and says, you know what, don't do it, and then goes to his wife and basically, he's not a very good, helpful spirit, really, because he just basically leads the wife to her death. You would have thought if he's got some prior knowledge of the future or what's going to happen, probably shouldn't send the mother over there, really.
Well, I mean, I think that what's interesting is, like, in the original, there's more of this sense of some kind of force at work that, like, no matter how much like Pascal's trying to fix things and stuff, or even like kind of Judd is like trying to like kind of say don't do it, like all these signs of saying don't do it, but meanwhile this force, right, is like kind of just really enticing Lewis and seductively going, kind of, come on, you can do it.
I know. Yeah, I mean, there's this sort of, I mean, that's what I kind of like about the character of Judd, because he can't really help himself. He so badly wants to resurrect the dead that he'll just rope him into it and doesn't tell him anything about it at all. And then goes, oh yeah, probably shouldn't have done that.
Oh man,
probably shouldn't resurrect things from the dead. But I kind of liked how they dealt with Victor Pascow in this, because it was kind of very American Werewolf in London.
Oh yes.
The prosthetic effects were pretty good for him, I thought. And I like the fact that he was just appearing in daylight and very bright situations, but unexpectedly, which is very similar to how, the main guy's friend in American Werewolf in London appeared as this sort of very matter-of-fact portrayal in the movie. But it kind of highlights the grotesqueness of the effects as well, because you can't escape from it. You have to kind of look at them in order to pay attention to the scene. So yeah, there's a kind of an interesting, I don't know, what would you call it, but it's kind of a freak show element to it.
Yes,
in that definitely.
And it also like lends like this kind of quirky like black humor, I think, like kind of like different times. It's something that like they lost in the remake, and of course we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is a movie that starts off and you think this could be kind of quite a serious horror movie, but as it goes on, you realize it's quite tongue-in-cheek, really. It doesn't take itself too seriously. because I mean, how scary can killer cats and toddlers really be? It's like the fact that you have to sort of, you can't really take it too seriously. But I mean, it takes me back to that quote from the Stephen King when he was talking to Stanley Kubrick with The Shining, where you know, basically Stanley Kubrick asks Stephen King if he believes in God, and he, you know, he says, well, you know, don't you? And he says no. Or you ask him, are you afraid of death? I think that's what it is. He asks Stanley Kubrick that, and he says, not really. And Stephen King says, well, you know, there are some people who are more afraid of what comes after death than of dying itself. And this is a movie that plays into that, that idea very strongly, you know, because basically everything that's bad gets unleashed after they come back.
Yeah, and I think you know, like the thing that like watching these like really remind me of is this short story, The Monkey's Paw, right? And if folks are unfamiliar with it, you know, like kind of, you know, like if for whatever reason you didn't encounter it in your grade school, I guess, lit programs, it's basically the story of a couple who, like, you know, basically they somehow come across this artifact that they're, you know, can make wishes, right? And they get only 3, and they can't take it back and stuff like that. So major spoilers always, you know, they wish for money, right? And then, but the you know, with each wish comes this dark kind of twist to it stuff. And because they wish for this money, you know, their son is killed, and that's how they got it, was because of insurance money. So they wish for the son to come back, and so of course he comes back, and it's apparently, you know, they never show it and stuff, or, you know, you never see it, but he's, you know, seems to have come back as a zombie and stuff, pounding on their door and stuff like that. So their third wish is like kind of basically, oh, you know, go away, you know, kind of, and this very much reminded me of like the whole Pet Sematary, both the original and remake. Just like one bad wish leading to another kind of unfortunate outcome.
It's another heartwarming children's story. Yeah, and I think there's well, I mean, the other thing that obviously is in this is Stephen King's favorite thing. It's an old Indian burial ground, and
yes,
it's in virtually every Stephen King story. But I mean, I've started to think, like, what is it he's actually trying to say with Indian burial grounds? For me, this is sort of interesting because American Indians often represent the spiritual connection with the land, but it's also, they also kind of represent how people who moved in afterwards and took over basically are disconnected from the land, or they have this denial of the land, because there's this real sort of romanticism about Native American Indians. It seems in advertising and culture, like there's loads of cars that are named after them, and packs of cigarettes, you know, Land O'Lakes and things like this, loads of sort of imagery and iconography. But you know, it's kind of, it's always seen as kind of a distance, kind of like, we're not part of that. They've got some intrinsic understanding which we will never have. Or, you know, I think it's sort of it represents this denial of the natural order in a way, which is exactly represented by father interacting with the actual Pet Sematary, you know, and the ground being sour, which I thought was a way of interpreting it.
Yeah, there's a couple times where, you know, Judd is saying to like the little girl Ellie, you know, oh, that's, you know, you shouldn't talk like that, because the girl was saying something like, you know, like, oh, I just want, you know, my cat back, you know, I just want church back and stuff like that. And you know, Judd's trying to explain to her, like, you know, one of the workings of death, because apparently the parents, like, you're talking about bad parenting, the parents aren't going to do it, so Judd's got to explain to her that, like, you know, that's not how it works, you know, little girl.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of a lot of the movie is sort of acceptance of death and the realities of it, and not trying to deal with that in a way that's honest, I suppose, because obviously they lie to the kids, and the father lies to the wife about what's going on with his sort of resurrecting things and people in the background. So I mean, you know, there's this, but it's kind of, I think in this movie in particular, it's represented as sort of one man's failure to try and fix mistakes through things that aren't natural, so to speak.
I mean, Lewis as a doctor different times. I mean, the medical folks are sometimes accused of kind of like the God complex, where they, in some ways, like, part of, being a medical professional is this power of life and death over people. So it can, very much, kind of give you a feeling of kind of being a little bit almighty and, omnipotent and stuff like that. And then meanwhile, like, Rachel, as the wife, apparently has this kind of history that we realize over time of like where her sister, suffered from spinal meningitis and, was really kind of, almost became a monster and before her death and stuff like that. So I guess in other words, each of them has their own kind of issues with death, which then of course, like, makes things complicated for the kids, right? Who are trying to understand death, never mind like kind of, ultimately the little boy, Gage, like actually he's this one, and again, as always, major spoiler, is the victim, unfortunately.
I mean, and also issues with parenting as well, in that the mum grew up in a household where this poor disabled girl was locked in a bedroom. And then the parents would go out doing what, I don't know, going out for dinner and leave the kid just to look after this very, very sick and ailing sister in the back room. So, they've definitely got a few points against them as well. Not great models. So I guess it's understandable that they moved to a house on a busy road with a cemetery in the back. Obviously, her thresholds of what's sensible parenting isn't really very good. There's also that incredible, it's first of all a very ridiculous scene where we've had the flashbacks to the sister dying, and it's kind of real freak show territory, and it gets very silly at that point, really. But then we have that amazing scene where the son is killed by the truck. Again, sorry, spoilers as always in these shows. And then we have the father-in-law getting into a fist fight with the father at the funeral, knocking the casket over. And I actually thought, was this a dream sequence at one point?
Right. I thought so too.
And I guess when that scene hit me, I thought, right, we're not taking ourselves too seriously from this point forward, are we? This is kind of just, fun and nothing else really.
Apparently that helped to bond, like, Lewis and the father-in-law and stuff somehow, like, kind of, because apparently after that was the airport scene, and they're like, oh, it's okay, like, kind of.
Lewis didn't look too happy he didn't look like he was on the right side of that. The father-in-law was happy to say, hey, sorry, I just kind of punched you and knocked your dead child's casket over, but it's fine, right? No hard feelings. And Lewis is there going, right. He kind of just limply shakes his hand.
That's true.
I don't know if that would actually be anything that you would be able to build a bridge over, to be honest with you.
I mean, they never really explained what was creating tension, because but apparently, the son, in-law being a doctor, it wasn't good enough apparently. So he's something, somehow, I don't know, disreputable, or I don't know.
I also really like the line that the wife said, "Oh, my dad warned me, you'd bring me more grief than any other." And I thought, wow, what a harsh thing to go into any relationship. Imagine, meeting your wife, and the first thing one of the early days is like, well, probably, you're going to be grieving like somebody died for the rest of your life if you marry this guy.
Yikes.
Yeah. Anyway, mind you, they had it coming because of the whole sister thing. So, bad luck to the in-laws, I suppose.
Yikes.
But I mean, it's pretty ridiculous, and then, you've got a made up 4-year-old that's kind of on the rampage, somehow inexplicably killing Herman Munster, who's about 10 times his size. But it's kind of funny.
I mean, he did somehow, lift the rocks that he was, he dug himself out of his grave and stuff like that from the Indian burial ground. So I don't know, like maybe he acquired some kind of, inhuman strength and stuff like that.
Yeah. But I still actually, in a funny sort of way, I mean, it's kind of funny, this movie, but it's also quite, it's still kind of quite disturbing in a way, because it plays with, a subject that's really pretty painful, which is this idea of how to deal with the death of a child.
Yeah.
But then kind of makes fun of it, which is quite a sort of a rock and roll thing to do, really.
Right.
So I think for that, it gets a lot of points for, for its bravado, I would say, as well as its dark humor.
Yeah, definitely. The only kind of sentimentalities, like kind of the moment again of Gage's death, where these photos flash in front of his Lewis's eyes, and then meanwhile he's yelling no, kind of that trope that we see now, like kind of more often than ever, like where the person just having this extended scream while all these different things are going on.
The talking Darth Vader.
Yes.
Episode 3, right? Yeah. No, I mean, it's I think that's what's so funny about this, is that not only are you moving to a house with a busy road and a cemetery on the back, but you're also just being quite laissez-faire about looking after your 4-year-old as well. You would have thought you'd be a little bit more observant had you already taken this radically dangerous step of moving into this house.
I mean, you think the way they made that happen, the death, right, was like they must have been having the picnic right by the road. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, and then otherwise, if they were a reasonable distance from the road, right, and stuff, you would think that they would notice that, like, hey, isn't that like our little kid like wandering towards the road, and like way ahead of like before he even got close to it, right, and stuff. You see what I'm saying? There's some kind of discrepancy between like where you would think they would reasonably place themselves, and then where the road is, and then how soon, like Gage managed to kind of toddle off onto the road. Yeah,
I mean, it's just a family of idiots, really, I think is how you have to view this movie. It's but fun to watch nonetheless. And I think that's actually really the funniest bit, is the bit where he's taking his wife's body right at the end to the Pet Sematary thing. I mean, it's the
third time's the charm, right, Lewis?
Absolutely. And I love that line of like, oh, this time we'll get it right. She hasn't been dead that long. It's going to be all right this time.
My line had to be kind of Gage when they finally like pumps him full of tranquilizers to kind of put him down the second time, and the little kid's like, no fear. That was the line I was telling you about before we watched this.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The other scene that really, actually, one of the most shocking scenes in modern day sort of terms is the scene how he kills the cat. I mean, obviously the feelings of the cat were not taken into account during that scene, because he seems pretty rough with that cat, and he's like there with the scruff of the neck, and he's there injecting it, and you just think, wow, that cat must have been quite traumatized by that scene, I think.
Well, I mean, that's I didn't think about that. The actual cat, right? You're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a live cat. It's not a fake cat, and he's sort of like grabbing it, and God, like
I was gonna say, like the character cat, he was pissed at because the sucker's been scratching him every other time that came across. But I mean, I guess it's a stunt cat that maybe, I don't know, they trained it to be handled roughly or something.
I don't know. I have a feeling the animal rights people will be on them these days if you did something like that in a movie. Plus the fact that cat must have had bright lights shone in its eyes the entire time to have the glowing effect. But they've blinded and sort of beaten up this cat during the making of this movie. But anyway.
So, animals were harmed apparently in the making of this movie.
Yeah, you couldn't really have that at the start, could you? Pet Sematary, no animals were harmed during the making of this movie. Anyway,
so should we move on to the
Let's
remake?
Move on.
So in this case, the story was by Matt Greenberg and stuff, and who's done many different things, of course. But the screenplay was in this case done by Jeff Bueller. And here we have Jason Clarke, who the thing I really know him from is just the Terminator kind of movie and stuff like that as Lewis. And then Amy Simons, who I really don't know, but I thought she did a great job as the wife, Rachel, stuff like that. Yeah, and then in this case, like I feel like the little girl Ellie, of course, she's like kind of I don't know, almost like a star, like and she really steals the scene anytime she was on and stuff like that. Jete Laurence, I guess she's French, but I think it will be one of those kind of situations too with these let's hope that she kind of finds a way to the child actress or actor maze and keeps her sanity slash like fortunes, I guess.
Yeah, I thought it was, in a way, I mean, I like the fact that they had an older child in this, because having like a 4-year-old in the original was pretty much just played for laughs. Whereas in this one, because she's, much older and is more coherent and things like this, it has a much creepier tone to it. And I thought it was really good. Where I think it fell down was the bits where she's like physically attacking adults. It was still a bit silly, really. My favorite scene was actually where he brings her back and he's like, trying to sort of create this feeling of normality. And she's in bed and he goes, oh, just go to sleep. And she's like, yeah, so am I dead? Where did I come back from? And he's sort of like trying to answer it. But she does it really well. She's very creepy in that scene.
Dead on.
And it would have been nice of them to play on that more subtly, like rather than her chasing them around with knives and things like this, done something that would have been, just generally a bit creepier. It may not have been quite as exciting, but I don't know, poison them or something like that. Something that's a bit more kind of, yeah.
And what did you think of like kind of the twist, right? That again, as always, major spoiler, that they killed her instead of Gage and stuff.
Yeah, no, I liked it actually. I mean, it kind of, it was a bit sort of meta in that they messed around with that scene and had
right. They kind of down to the wire. You could tell like they were kind of teasing you.
I know. But I mean, I was fine with that. I actually, because I thought it would make more sense in terms of the movie to have an older actor, because as we've seen in Children of the Corn, it's like it's a big stretch to try and make young kids menacing. But she did an excellent job. She was really really good. So yeah, it was a good choice. I thought I actually enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I felt like it did right away, like kind of well for me it's a little bit of fan service, but not like not what's called not overly done, because like if you're a fan of the original, you're kind of like like thinking, of course, that like, oh, this is gonna kill off Gage and stuff like that. But then it was like kind of cool that they kind of like, you could even tell like they're just down to the wire, like playing it up to like that we're not gonna tell you until this very last second and stuff.
Yeah, no, I was fine. But I mean, I don't, a lot of remakes, they try and sort of second guess you at every turn and try and keep you going, oh yeah, they won't be expecting this. They actually pretty much followed the same story except for that, which I kind of like. I hate it when they're too heavy-handed with that sort of re-engineering, and I thought that the fact that they did this one a bit more seriously and it had quite a nice sort of serious tone all the way through was pretty good. And it wasn't overly bloated or anything. It didn't sort of waste too much time. It cut to the chase with quite a lot of the scenes. I think my disappointment was the Victor Pascow character, because he only really appeared a couple of times. He didn't have many lines, and there wasn't. What's nice about him in the original is that there's this sort of feeling that he's questioning his own reality. He doesn't know if he's dreaming or if he's awake. And in this one, there isn't really very much of that. He just appears, gives it a message, and then goes away. I preferred the original in the way that it's twisting his sense of sanity and reality. Right. It wasn't so well done in this, but
I think it definitely does a great job then, like in the original, of blurring, like I said, the what is kind of really happening and what is like kind of the supernatural thing that's going on and stuff. I think like what they kind of maybe were shifting towards what kind of the trade-off was, that then they did more of the Rachel and there's kind of sister story and stuff. And I mean it definitely made it a lot more heavy because of that and stuff, where it's this issue of like kind of death and guilt and stuff that we have different times, quote unquote wishing somebody was dead, because you just want them to kind of move on and stuff like that, and a little bit like of selfishness. Was this the one where she talked about laughing and stuff?
Yeah.
So it was, okay.
They didn't have that in the original.
Okay.
They just said that she wished that her sister had died because she hated sort of having to go and feed her and all this kind of thing. I did think the becoming a mangled bone heap at the bottom of the dumb waiter was perhaps a little bit overkill. You didn't really need that, to be honest. It was a bit much, but yeah, I kind of like the way that they kept reusing. That was actually, instead of with Victor Pascow, they actually replaced this whole idea of someone challenging their sort of sanity and reality with her character and her hearing the noises in the roof of the bed moving and all this kind of thing. So I thought that was actually very effective. I did enjoy that. I thought that was good.
Yeah, I think, like you said, also pointed out that the original was kind of dealt more with Lewis's point of view, and this one kind of like, they kind of rounded it out a little bit more between the wife and Lewis and stuff, and I think it's like kind of that they wanted to kind of bring it more to the combination of like losing a loved one, and also the idea of parenting and stuff, because we kind of like in the original with Denise Crosby, she's a pretty much kind of I just love you, and kind of like, and whereas this one there's more tension between the two, because Rachel's more protective of Ellie finding out about death too early, and like kind of wanting her to spare her like the pain that she dealt with and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes more sense in this one. It comes across much better. Although it was just a shame they had the whole dumb waiter thing, because let's face it, if you were like a young child who had to go and feed someone who's dying of spinal meningitis, that's horrible enough. They don't need to also come crashing down in a dumb waiter to highlight that the horror of that scene. You could have just had more scenes with her trying to look after the sister, and that would have been hard enough. But so it's a bit much. So I think they had a real opportunity to make this really much more psychological, actually, in a way than they did. But and
I think they threw in a little bit about the idea of because along with the approach to death and stuff, it became more of a question of faith versus science too, because this one we see Lewis more as a doctor. Like we don't really see any scenes, like maybe like one scene in the original, but this one, like Jason Clarke, we really see him more as like kind of on the campus and stuff like that. We see, and it seems like that he's more of this man of science and stuff like that, more than whereas the original was probably just the fact that like he just was really resistant at first to anything kind of outside of his perception and stuff. Here it's like kind of that we get more of a sense that like Lewis is trying to be like kind of rational stuff until of course things start dying, and then like all of a sudden that rationality's thrown out the window. Is like, well, if it works and brings him back, I'll do it.
Let's go for it. Yeah, I think also, I mean, I'd like John Lithgow as well as as Judd in this. That was nice to have someone of quite a sort of serious actor coming in as Judd, and that was portrayed far more realistically than the original. In that he's there sort of going, we're gonna bury this here cat and see if it comes back, and it's shouldn't have probably done that. Whereas in this one, he kind of explains that it's got this power over him, and he feels terribly sort of guilty about it, which is more understandable. In the original, Judd doesn't really seem too bothered about it. He's just kind of like, yep, made a mistake, better go and kill this guy when he comes home. So I thought he did a good job.
I mean, I enjoyed Fred Gwynn as Judd. I thought like as quirky, kind of I guess for some reason, even though it was like kind of cliche, it did feel like something that fit in the Stephen King kind of movie. I mean, that's just the way it is for me and stuff like that. Maybe part of it was like kind of like at that time in the 80s, which is a funny thing that like they up to making, Pet Sematary, apparently like, the market, so to speak, was like really, tired of like Stephen King movies and stuff. So they had a hard time pushing it through. And then, then they made, Pet Sematary. Then they're like, oh, okay, we can make money doing this. So then it was like kind of, the hot donuts light was on again for kind of, making more Stephen King.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, I think that actually sort of speaks to the quality of some of his writing, in that it can be interpreted in kind of quite a funny way or quite a serious way, depending very much on how the writer and the director do it. I mean, one of my favorites was always Cat's Eyes, because because that's quite tongue-in-cheek as well. And but it's also quite sort of menacing in an odd sort of way. There's something that's kind of, I quite like something when it's obviously a little bit light-hearted because it's quite disarming, and then when something disturbing does happen, it's kind of that much more affecting. Which is, I think, is what the original Pet Sematary has for me. It's quite sort of its tongue-in-cheekness and black humor actually kind of belies the real kind of existential dread there is of having to constantly worry about children and things like this. So
I think that's a great point, that like, it can go different ways and stuff. And I think part of the reason why is that King himself, has said he's a fan of like, never mind like, the kind of more gothic horror or, the more serious kind of Edgar Allan Poe kind of thing. But just as much, he's a fan of like things like Creepshow and, these kind of pulpy comics and stuff that were big, at the time. And you kind of get that sense, like, like between his appearance in Creepshow and his, different times how he's contributed to, the other one was like Tales from the Crypt, right, where you had the Crypt Keeper, right, kind of doing his cackle kind of, different times. So there's kind of that element too, that is like a little bit campiness, a little bit of like kind of, just like very, pulpy, just for lack of a better way to put it and stuff.
Yeah, and of course he makes a cameo in the original as the priest.
That's right. Yeah. One of the rare appearances, but yeah,
he doesn't often do cameos, does he? Not to my knowledge, anyway. Yeah, no. Overall, I thought I mean, I suppose it's one way. I think again with this remake, I felt it was a little bit sort of half-hearted in that I think they could have maybe explored more of the psychological element and made it actually more sort of drama than out and out kind of horror, a bit like kind of the Dark Water remix in a way. Remake, I should say. I think that would have been quite an interesting angle to take on it, and differentiated it quite a lot from the original. And the original is just generally kind of more fun, so I think it probably wins out of the two. But it was a solid remake, definitely one of the better ones we've watched, that's for sure.
Yes,
because we've watched some real stinkers. So
yeah, that's what I was going to say, especially after the Children of the Corn, like the only way you could go pretty much was up.
Absolutely.
So any other kind of last thoughts? I think that sums it up. That like pretty solid remake. I think maybe again some few missed opportunities, but overall like pretty entertaining, pretty watchable stuff.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty decent. No, not really much more.
Yeah. I think it just goes back to like parents, please, for the love of God, find a house that has like kind of either speed bumps or that's separate from traffic that children can't play in the streets.
If you're going to move away from the city to a stereotypical Stephen King backwater country house, then at least do your due diligence and make sure there's speed bumps.
And Indian burial ground in the backyard.
Yeah, Indian burial grounds would be the first thing to look for,
Alrighty, I think that'll be a wrap for this time then. I'm John Chang with it. Oh, I should say, coming up, we'll be looking at the Salem's Lot. I'm looking forward to kind of watching that. And then we'll, of course, discuss some of the other ones that we've been talking about with Stephen King remakes versus originals. So once again, John Chang, Dan Edmonds, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you at the movies.